So before this video starts, I just want to show you something. So you know how I usually have like quite nice long hair? Well, yesterday I went to the barber's asking for a very simple haircut, literally just a short back and sides with like my hair just going below my eye, like on top, like an undercut. And well, basically I came out with a bowl cut, and but you know, I just didn't have enough confidence to say, oh, this is not what I asked for. Well, I did say this is not what I asked for. I said to them the back isn't what I asked for and it's too short, but they just said it's fine and it's what I asked for. So, you know, great barbers right there. As I was going home, I let my mum know that my hair has just been ruined, and basically she offered to try and fix it. So my mum and my girlfriend tried to fix my hair, and they done a lot better job than the barbers did, but it was still very bad because the barbers messed it up that much. So then I decided to just buzz it. So now I have a buzz cut. Yeah, I hate it. I would not do this willingly, but you know, it's just annoying that I go to the barbers that I've been to many times before and they completely ruin my hair. So I'm never going back there again. It was honestly the worst haircut I've ever had in my life, and I've had some awful haircuts. So sorry for the lack of hair. Anyway, I realised that I have never done a video about my camera collection, so I am going to do that video now. I've spoke about the cameras that I have in a few other videos, and I spoke about cameras that I used to have, but I've realised I've never actually properly spoke about the cameras that I own and my collection of cameras. So I'm just basically going to talk about the cameras that I have and say like a few positive things and a few negative things. I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible because I did try to record this video yesterday, but it ended up being a 50-minute video because I just kept rambling on and on. Anyway, so let's get into the video. To start off, we have my Fujifilm GFX-3. Some pros with this camera are the image quality. It has amazing image quality as you would expect from a 52, I think, megapixel medium format sensor, so that's just a no-brainer right there. The form factor is really good as well because it is actually quite a small camera for being a medium format camera. It's about the size of a DSLR. The ergonomics for the camera are really good as well. The button placement is amazing and the buttons feel amazing, especially the actual top dials where your shutter speed and ISO are. They feel really good. And paired up with the Miticon, it has such a unique look and I absolutely love it. It sort of recreates that Pentax 6.7 105 2.4 look, and it's probably the closest you can get to looking like a film medium format camera that you can get on a digital medium format camera. Paired up with the Miticon, the depth of field is crazy. Even with some of the native lenses, like the native Fujifilm glass, the depth of field is quite good. It's not as good though, since I think those lenses are quite boring. The shallow aperture is also amazing. You can really just get a very nice fall off of the bokeh, and you know how it goes from in focus to out of focus is a very nice gradual fall off, and it's just really fun. This camera is so fun to use and fun to shoot with, and you will get some amazing images. Now let's get on to some things that I don't like. The camera body and lenses are really expensive, extremely expensive. I think when this camera first came out, the body was around £5,000 and the lenses are still very expensive. I got mine secondhand for £1,600 in excellent condition off MPB, but I feel like they sent me a new one by accident since it was just perfect and there was not a single mark on it at all. This is only a negative with using the Miticon, and that is manual focus. The Miticon doesn't have autofocus, which means I need to manual focus, and it just makes the camera a little bit slower. If you like autofocus, then you should get the native Fujifilm glass, since you know they can autofocus, but they're just not as interesting as the third-party lenses. And leading on from the manual focus, the camera is slow. Everything about it feels quite slow, but not necessarily in a bad way. Everything about the camera is just a bit slower than any other camera, but that's because it's obviously medium format and it's not the newest technology, but it's not bad necessarily. It's more so if you're just wanting to try and get a quick shot, you're not going to be able to. And my last negative is the focus peaking sucks. While it is very useful to check what's in focus, the quality of the screen or the viewfinder goes down so much. It becomes really grainy and blurry, and it's just not a very nice thing to look at, but it does really help you get things in focus if you are manual focusing. So while the quality does suck, the actual focus peaking itself is great and very effective. Now on to the second camera, which is my Fujifilm X-Pro 3. The form factor on this camera is amazing. It's extremely small and compact, and everything is just where you need it to be. And that leads into the ergonomics. This camera just feels good, the buttons are where you need them to be, the buttons feel good, the dials feel good, just everything about it is great, apart from the ISO dial. That's the one thing about the buttons that I don't like. This camera is also very fun to use. You'll just have a blast using it. There's nothing really like it on the market right now, apart from maybe a Leica, but even then, you don't have the hybrid viewfinder in the Leica, and it's just a bit more fun to use a Fuji in my opinion. I reckon with a Leica you'll get better results because, you know, it's got a full frame sensor that's like double or triple the megapixels of this camera, but it's still an amazing camera and it's very fun to use. The hybrid viewfinder is really fun. It's just really cool actually. Like I said before, there's nothing like it on the market apart from other Fuji cameras, but they're going up in price while the Fuji X-Pro 3 is staying relatively around the same price. And I think it is just better than other Fuji cameras anyway, like the X100 series, because it allows you to change lenses. This isn't necessarily anything specific to the X-Pro 3, but the film simulations are amazing. Fujifilm's film simulations are just great and they will actually make your JPEGs look amazing. This camera is also very comfortable to hold. Fujifilm have done a good job creating this camera. It's lightweight and small, but not small enough to be annoying when holding it. It's still large enough to have a comfortable grip. Also, this camera just looks amazing. The design of the camera is really nice and it's just a good looking camera. You'll feel good when using it because it looks so good, and that leads into my next point. It just feels good to use. That sort of just encompasses all the other points that I've made, but it just feels like a good camera. And I really recommend getting this camera or even just trying it out because you will fall in love with it. But this camera is not without its downsides. For example, the optical viewfinder can't go below a 35mm focal length. So if you like shooting 28mm, then this camera isn't for you if you're wanting to use the optical viewfinder. I mean, you still can use a 28mm lens, but it's just you can't really get the frame lines there because they actually go past what you can see. So you still can shoot, but you're just not really going to know what's in your frame. Another thing is the auto exposure is quite annoying. I think it's just a Fujifilm thing, but sometimes the auto exposure can be very off and just completely inaccurate. But it's not the worst thing ever, and you definitely still can get great results. But every now and again you'll get a photo that's overexposed or underexposed, and in times when you're wanting to get that photo bang on like that, then it is annoying. I also really don't like the screen. This is also just a personal preference thing, but I think if the screen was able to come out and flip round and go back in, so the screen is facing out, then the camera would be a lot better. But I think it's just a bit gimmicky having the screen only being able to be up or just pulled down and being in the way. I just think it's a bit annoying. Another one is shooting portraits with the camera, and actually coincides perfectly with my next point. The camera is just hard to shoot portraits with, and holding the camera in a portrait orientation is a bit difficult because it doesn't really have much of a grip. Because the screen flips out as well, it's a bit in the way when you're wanting to take vertical photos, which means you're most likely going to have to use the viewfinder, and it's not the most comfortable when you're in portrait orientation. When you're in landscape orientation, this camera is so comfortable, but as soon as you flip it to portrait orientation, it just gets a bit in the way. Anyway, now on to my Pentax 6.7, which is just behind me up there. Obviously, being a medium format camera, the image quality is amazing. You may not be able to zoom in as much as something like the GFX, but this quality is still crazy. It's a fun camera, it's very fun to use, it just feels good when shooting, like the shutter mechanism, the winding mechanism, just everything feels good. When you take a photo, you really feel like you've taken a photo. The clunk of the mirror is just really satisfying, and it feels like you've actually done something other than just press a button, which is a problem with a lot of digital cameras nowadays. This is not anything specific to the camera, but more so a lens that you can get on the camera, and that is the 105 2.4. It has amazing depth of field and amazing separation, and just such a shallow aperture that it's just one of the best lenses I've ever used, and it is so good for portraits. Now go on to the cons. The camera is very heavy, like it's extremely heavy, and the ergonomics of the camera also aren't great when holding it because it doesn't have a grip. And being heavy and not having a grip is just, you know, it's just bad. The camera is also very slow in a similar way to the GFX is slow. It's not a necessarily bad thing, but if you're wanting to take a quick photo, then this may not be the camera for you. You can do it, but it'll be a bit more difficult. The mirror shake as well is quite a problem if you're wanting to do like long exposures, or if you've got a slower shutter speed. It's just going to be a bit of a problem because the actual mirror is so big that when it like flips up and down, it shakes the camera because it's just huge. But if if you're not really wanting to go below a 60th of a second, then this isn't really going to be that much of a problem for you. Once again, this isn't necessarily something to do with the actual camera body itself, but also my viewfinder. My viewfinder isn't metered, which means I can't actually tell what shutter speed or aperture I'm meant to be using. You can get a metered prism, but I don't have that, and it does cost a little bit more money. That isn't necessarily anything to do with the camera, but more so just a part of the camera that you can swap out for a metered one. I think this one is also just me, but I really don't like the loading of the camera. I used to own a Mju 7 and loading that was completely fine, and it's not actually too dissimilar to the Pentax X7, but for some reason using the Pentax X7, I really don't like loading it, but I think that's just me. Right, let's go on to the next camera, which was on my top 5 film cameras of all time, and I just love this camera. I probably should have put it higher on that list though. And that is the Olympus Mju I. This camera is super fun to use. Since it's a point and shoot, it's just very easy and fun to use, and I really think everyone needs a point and shoot because they're just so great. It's extremely small, which means you can put it in your pocket and just take it anywhere with you. Surprisingly, the lens on this camera is better than some lenses I have on other cameras, which is weird since it is a tiny lens and it's on a point and shoot film camera. It's a 35mm 3.5, and while the aperture not maybe the lowest or biggest, whichever way you want to say it, it's very good and you can get a shallow depth of field. Being a point and shoot, it also has a built-in flash, and this flash is extremely bright. It will really shock you how bright this flash actually is, and it can light up a room very evenly, and you will get great flash photos with this camera. That's all I can really say about it because it is just a flash, but it's just a good one and it's reliable. This camera is also really durable. I have dropped it on multiple occasions, spilt drinks on it, and somehow it still survives. Having a clamshell design as well means you can cover the lens while you're not using it, and that means dust won't get on the lens, or it may not get scratched, or just, it will just protect the lens. The camera has fast autofocus and is quite reliable with the autofocus. It's not the best, but it's definitely not the worst, and it will get you great results. And it's just really the perfect pocket camera, or everyday camera, or camera that you just take anywhere with you. On a night out, on a walk, with family, just anywhere really, it works perfectly. And the only negative that I can say about this camera is the price. It's going up in price right now, and it's just not the most ideal to be spending a lot of money on a point and shoot, although this camera is kind of worth it. Anyway, now we're on to my next camera, which is my Yashica FX-3. This camera is extremely easy to use and is very simple. It's just a basic SLR, but that doesn't mean it can't take great photos since, it's the user that takes the photos and not the camera. But it does still have quite a few good features. It's also a CY mount camera, which means you have great lens choice. You can get some cheap lenses, some medium range lenses, and some very expensive lenses for this camera, so you have a good range of lenses, all for different price points. It's also a very cheap camera. I got mine for £40, and you can probably get them for cheaper than that, and mine actually came with a new strap and some other stuff as well, and I think I got some rolls of film with it as well, so I got a really good deal there, and you can probably get it for even cheaper. The camera is surprisingly durable. I've dropped it a few times and it's got quite a few scratches on it, and it's just been in some not ideal situations, but it's still survived. It's also got a built-in light meter. I'm not sure if all the FX3 models have built-in light meters, but my one does, and it's very reliable. The camera is also extremely small. It's not too much bigger than my Mju, and it's easy to just fit in a small bag or even a big pocket really. Now let's move on to the cons. The camera does feel a bit flimsy, although it's not. The camera is clearly made of a cheaper metal that isn't meant to be really durable feeling, but it is actually quite durable. So it's more of a feeling than actual durability. So it's just more of personal preference if you want something that feels a bit more durable, but it will be the same as this camera when it comes to actual durability wise, because it is a durable camera. I said durable so many times then. I'm not sure if this is with every camera, but my winding lever feels a bit weird. I think that may just be my camera though, but it is what it is. It doesn't affect the shooting of the camera, it just feels a bit stiff sometimes. The shutter speeds also aren't the fastest, but you can get different FX3 models that have higher shutter speed. Anyway, now let's go on to the Canon Model 7. It's a cheap rangefinder, and it's a good way to get into rangefinders if you don't want to be breaking the bank. You can also get some decent lenses with it. It's sturdy and durable durable and it will take a beating, and it just feels really good to hold. It's a very heavy camera and you can feel that it's just extremely well built. It's got a decent viewfinder. It's quite bright, but it's not the brightest I've seen, but it is still usable and you can definitely see your like frame markings like very easily, and you can tell what you're focusing on like extremely easily as well. It's also very fun to use, but I think that just comes with rangefinders since it is such a unique shooting experience. But yeah, it's just very fun to use and it feels good. The camera has some decent lens choices and you can get some great lenses with it, but you can also get some cheap lenses with it, but we'll talk more about that in the cons. It's also cheap, like I said before, and you can pick it up for around £100, which isn't too bad when you're thinking about an old Canon camera that is a rangefinder, since some of them are quite expensive. The cons are the lenses get expensive very fast. You can get some pretty good budget options, but they go very expensive very quickly. You can get some Jupiter ones like I have a Jupiter 8 and a Jupiter 12, and I probably spent £200 in total for both those lenses, and they are very good. But if you're wanting a higher end lens, then you're probably going to have to be spending quite a bit of money. There's the Canon 50mm 0.95, which is basically just like the dream lens, and it's ridiculously priced. It does seem very good, but it's just not worth it in my opinion. Also, using that on a rangefinder won't be great since the focus will be so shallow. Although the camera does have a light meter, quite often it doesn't work. So if you're wanting to use the light meter on this camera, then you're most likely not going to be able to. Luckily with mine does actually work, but most of the time I've heard that it doesn't work since it is this old form of light meter. I'm not actually sure what it's called, but you know, since it's like a 60-year-old camera, it's not in the best condition anymore and it won't work. Well, it may work, but most of the time it won't. Now let's get on to the penultimate camera. And this camera is the Canon EOS 30. I made a video about this camera calling it the best beginner film camera, and I do think it is a great beginner film camera, but it's just not the most interesting camera. The first pro is that it is cheap. It's extremely cheap. You can get it for like £5 to £10 if you're lucky. I got mine for 30, but that came with a battery grip as well, and it was in like mint condition. So honestly, this camera is very easy to get. The next pro is that it has a good lens mount. It uses the EF lens mount, which means you have a large variety of Canon like full frame lenses that you can use, and there are some really good lenses in that selection. The camera actually has very good specs in it. You can shoot very fast, it has auto winding, you can shoot in different program modes, it has really good autofocus, and just overall it's a good camera to use. But that's really where the pros end because it isn't the most interesting camera, so we'll move on to the cons. And the first con is that the camera is just boring. It's not the most interesting camera. It's just a good camera really. It has good specs, but other than that, there's not much to it. It also doesn't look great, and I feel like when a camera doesn't look great, then you're not really going to enjoy using it as much as you would like the Canon Model 7 or the X-Pro 3 or anything like that. Like those cameras, you're going to enjoy using a lot more than this camera. Although the specs may be better, it's really just underwhelming because it's just a tool. That's what the camera is. It's just a tool to get photos and just not really care about much while you're doing it. Right, now we're on to the final camera, which is a pretty unique one. It is my Fujifilm Instax SQ10. Let's talk about the pros of this camera. The pros are that it's an instant film camera, but you can also shoot digital. It's a bit of a weird system because you actually take photos on a sensor, but then you can print them out on the Fujifilm Instax Square film. I think the biggest pro is that it is just unlimited photos really, as long as you have a big enough SD card. It also does have built-in storage as well, but that's only like 20 photos or something. It's not too many. You can also edit the images in camera, which is pretty cool. It has some filters and most of them are pretty bad, but I quite like the lunar one. I just think it looks really nice. You can also change the highlights and shadows, and you can add a vignetting effect if you want. It's not the most in-depth editing, but it will get you different results. It's also extremely easy to use and only has a few buttons, so really anyone can use it and get used to it quite quickly. But now let's talk about the cons. The lens isn't great, it's not the sharpest, and the focal length isn't the best. It's the equivalent of a 28mm, but I would really like something a bit tighter. Although the 28mm is useful for group shots or if you just don't want to get super far away when taking a photo, it's not the best for like actual just one-on-one portraits or just images of stuff. There is a bit of lens distortion because it is really wide, so especially when you go close to objects, it does distort the images a little bit. I'd prefer like a 35 to a 40 50mm focal length. I think the Polaroid is a 40 and that looks very nice. The sensor also doesn't create the best images. I think it's only a 3 megapixel sensor and the sensor is extremely small. It's like a quarter of an inch or something. So it's very small, so you don't get loads of detail and the dynamic range isn't very good. Like at all. It's really bad actually. Like if there's highlights in the image, then it will just expose for them, or if there are shadows, then it will just expose for them. It won't expose in the middle, and you have to do it yourself by finding like a midway point between those, focusing and then also moving back over to where you was wanting to frame the image. So it's just not great. The screen also isn't very reliable. When you're printing your images, they look completely different to how they actually come out, but you'll get used to that quite easily and you'll learn to overexpose your images a little bit. But anyway, that brings us to pretty much the end of my camera collection. I do have a few others, but I just don't use them, and like they're just not exactly like cameras that I would want to talk about. There's one that's just like this weird point and shoot thing, but it's held like a camcorder, but I never use it. I've used it once and I was going to make a video about it. I think I still might make a video about it, but for now I don't really want to talk about those because I don't use them and there's really not much to say, and I don't have enough usage of them to tell you about them. I guess there is one more camera that I can tell you about, which is my Canon 80D, which I'm recording this with now. I can't really say pros and cons because it is just a good camera. It's not the best, but it's just good. It's just overall useful. But anyway, that is the end of this video. I apologise for you staring at my horrible hair for this long. Hopefully it will grow out quite quickly, but yeah. I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye.